Good evening. I'm Damos in the Dark.
Hello, I'm Milani Lopez 7277. I sound like someone ordered to say a number that is just disregarded. Carry on.
There we go.
Yes, get your spectacles, old man.
Well, it's been a while. Been through some things. We're moving our entire ranch, so I stopped recording for a while on my channel, and then our house burned down. As you may be able to tell, we're recording in a travel trailer right now. We wanted to get another recording out. This is my first time doing it on a live video.
What?
We're going to read tonight from one of my newer books, Triangle Road. It will hopefully be released sometime in the near future. We're going to give you the first three chapters, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm not used to doing video like this. I don't know if we have the option of editing or not, but we'll see how it goes. I had to use a GPS to get where I was going. The road I was on was one I was not familiar with. While driving through the countryside was pleasant, I was in a bit of a hurry to get where I was going. Eventually I came to a small town. It was the type of town that I would have loved to stop and check out on any other day. It was an old country town that had been around since the 1800s. It even had an old country store that was in its original building. Although it had been rehabbed more than a few times, they kept it as original as possible. The local movie theater was once a playhouse, and before that a saloon and brothel. While it may be considered a small middle-of-nowhere town, to me it was rich in history. It was also the type of town where you could find some of the friendliest people and tastiest food. Unfortunately, I had to be somewhere, and I was a bit behind schedule, so I kept on driving. Had I stopped, my day probably had gone in an entirely different direction. I followed the directions coming over my speaker, and it took me out the other side of town. I was on a narrow country road that made me question the route GPS was taking me on. When the GPS instructed me to take the next turn and proceed over the bridge, I did as the navigation said. I didn't know it then, but that bridge would change my life forever. Lying here in a crumpled heap of what was once my car, I now know that the life-changing event doesn't necessarily mean you still have to be alive. I've been driving down this route from the beginning of Triangle Road to this very same bridge ever since, and I have seen many strange things. Perhaps I should tell you about some of them. It might be better sorry. It might give you a better understanding of where you now find yourself. If you're ever on Triangle Road, you may even see some strange things yourself. Take my advice. If you do see something, don't stop. And if your navigation app tells you to cross any bridges, make sure they're still there before driving across them. If you don't heed my warning, never fear. I have room for you in my passenger seat, right here. Triangle Road has claimed many victims. Some wander the road until they finally get to their destination. It's like their unfinished business. For some, however, the same thing that drew them here does its best to keep them. The ferryman's job is to find these wandering souls and help them get to that destination so they can let go and cross over. For some, it's local destination. For others, it's a bridge back to where they came from. The ferryman is someone that owes a penance. When his or her penance has been served, a new ferryman must be selected. No, not all ferrymen are men. Now, part of your sentence is to figure out what you did wrong to get here in the first place. The universe's cruel joke, since you can't remember a whole lot about your life before. I do remember the basics. My name, of course, and how old I was. The fact that I was single and didn't have any kids. My ambitious nature never left time for a lasting relationship. Man, I was always thought there was time to settle down and raise a family after I'd become successful. Yes, I had regrets, despite having all the material things a person could want before this happened. I can tell you this much. Doesn't matter whether you drive off a bridge in a Toyota or a Ferrari. You still leave in a coroner's van. I know this sounds strange, but there are some spirits that aren't interested in moving on. They do like to catch a ride from time to time, for a bit of company. There are also those who still think they're alive. Then there are the ones that aren't human. If you're not careful, the last type will lead you astray, perhaps even to your doom. Yes, there are fates worse than death. Gives me chills just thinking about it. As for what causes so many people to meet their untimely demise on Triangle Road, I have yet to find out. I know it exists, and that's good enough for me. I just take spirits where they need to go and try and avoid the creatures or entities which feed on them. Like I said, there are worse things than death, and I for one would like to avoid them. It's a lot to take in, I know. Well, I have to get going. You're sure I can't take you somewhere? It's really no trouble at all. It's kind of what I do. Well, I'm glad you've decided to come along. Hop in. Maybe I can tell you a few of those stories I promised. Let's see. What might you find interesting? How about a little background first? There are, of course, multiple streets named Triangle Road. First, draw a line from Triangle Road in Canada to the one in California. Then draw one to the one in New Jersey and back to the one in Canada. When you're done, you have a triangle. Things mainly occur at the corners of this triangle, but there are more than enough that occur along the invisible lines that connect them. While the roads that make up this triangle do not physically connect, they do connect in other ways. There are multiple bridges that connect with one on Triangle Road in California. The bridge may be the main intersection of all this. You can be driving on one Triangle Road and suddenly find yourself on another. You can be crossing one bridge and find yourself exiting a completely different bridge. It's a wild phenomenon, I know. By the way, we didn't have a chance for proper introductions last time. My name is Maxwell Scott, but you can just call me Max. It's a pleasure to meet you. You know, traveling on this road tonight, we may even come across something new. In the meantime, I'll tell you one of the shorter tales. Last October, I came across a woman on the side of the road. She was looking for a woman just like you. So, of course, I stopped for her. I mean, what else do I have to do traveling this road day and night? Besides, it gets lonely out here, and I certainly don't mind a bit of company. She looked a bit disheveled, and I asked her if she was okay. She nods and tells me that her car got a flat tire and ran off the road. She had to climb up a steep embankment to get back to the street. She continues saying she just needs a ride home. Well, who am I to refuse a damsel in distress? So I happily agree to give her a ride. I asked her for directions. I don't trust navigation apps anymore. She explains that the first turn will be about 5 miles ahead. She's not very chatty, but responds to questions well enough. So I asked her a few questions to keep the conversation going. Asked how long she's been living in these parts, and she told me it only been about 9 months. I asked her who she was and where she was staying, and she explained to me that she lived with her parents and 2 siblings. She was obviously young, probably around 17, so I asked her about school. She suddenly perks up and says she's graduating at the end of the school year. She has plans to move south to the city with her boyfriend and just can't wait. Something seems to dawn on her, and she mumbles something I can barely make out. I thought he was in the car with me. No, that can't be right. I decided it was best to let sleeping dogs lie. She shrugs her shoulders and looks up at the road again, the faint smile returning to her face. The young girl, Jennifer I believe her name was, points out a street up ahead and tells me to turn there with a smile on her face. I oblige and take the turn, which leads deeper into the woods. Soon enough we come to a dirt road on the left, and Jennifer indicates that that's her street. I take the left, drive down the bumpy dirt road that winds through the tall pines for about a quarter mile before coming to a cabin. It's definitely abandoned, with broken windows and a collapsing roof, but she says this is home. I stopped the car, and she hopped out, thanking me for the ride. Are you sure? I asked her.
Of course, there's my parents right there.
She responds, once again smiling with a look that's something like relief, as if a huge weight has been lifted from her. I looked to the front of the house, seeing only darkness beyond the open door. When I looked back to where she'd been standing, there's no one there. I glance around the surrounding area, and still, there's no sign of her. The tree line is close, but not enough that she could have run off in them without me seeing. I had yet to see sign of any other person, and doubted the possibility of someone living here. While I had the urge to look for or check the house, I learned a long time ago not to give in to ideas of that sort. I've seen what happens to people when they investigate strange occurrences related to Triangle Road. Before pulling onto the road, I silently wished her the best and hoped she was finally at rest. This did seem to have been the end of her journey, for I never saw her again. Do you remember now how you came to be here? You want to hear more, you say? Of course. I'm sure we have plenty of time. What tale should I share with you next?
Oh,
You want to read this one? Chapter 2. Where am I?
I've got an interesting tale for you. This one should keep you entertained until we find our destination. Triangle Road doesn't always end up where the map tells you it will. It's happened to me on more than one occasion. This story, though, it's about a man named Pete Winslow. I gave him a ride a few years back, and he told me about his last trip. about the last trip he remembers taking on Triangle Road. I'll tell you the story as Pete told me, at least as best as I can recollect. I've been traveling this road for so long and heard so many stories. Sometimes it all just blurs together. Not to worry, I'm feeling especially clear-headed today, and this story is kind of hard to forget. You see, Pete was from BC, Canada. He had started his drive there on a route he had taken many times before, a route that included Triangle Road, or at least a Triangle Road in Canada. Pete would often hit the entertainment district when he had nothing to do, and he was off that day and decided to visit Monkey Nine Brewing Company. He had seen it on a previous trip to the old spaghetti factory and had been waiting to check it out. He hiked bypassing the traffic on number 6 RD and cutting back down on Triangle Road. Not that traffic was heavy by the standards of someone who lived in a big city. He had done this several times before when visiting the entertainment area. He'd only been driving for a short while and wasn't particularly tired or anything. He had just gotten distracted for a moment. His gas light had come on, and he feared that he had sprung a leak in a fuel line or something. He had knew that he had filled the tank and his car had been in the garage. So he doubted someone had siphoned it. Siphoned it. When he looked up from the fuel gauge, he realized that he didn't recognize his surroundings. He tried searching on his phone for gas station, and quickly realized there was none close enough. Pete pulled over with a sigh and tried calling CAA for roadside assistance after listening to various recordings. The service rep finally came on the line. "May I have your location, sir?" "I'm not sure of my exact location, but I'm on Triangle Road. Would you like us to triangulate your position using your phone, sir?" "That would be great, thank you." "Hold on the line, sir. I'll have a location momentarily."
I'll take over. Pete hadn't noticed where he was when he brought up maps to look for a gas station. He'd just typed in "gas station near me" and took note of the distance. When the CAA representative came back on the line to give him the number of AAA of California, he was very confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There must be a mistake. I was just driving down Triangle Road near Richmond. I should only be a mile or so from number 6 Road." "I'm sorry, sir, but your phone location clearly shows its location is Triangle Road, Mariposa, California." Pete hung up the phone with a sense of dread washing over him. Pete wasn't sure whether to be scared or frustrated. On the one hand, he knew without a doubt that he had just been in Canada, and there was no way to accidentally drive here, let alone into the United States. He would have to go through the border for God's sakes. On the other hand, he had brought up maps on his phone, and it showed his location as being in California. How was he going to explain this to authorities? Heck, how was he going to get home? It wasn't like he kept a passport with him. For now, however, there was the issue of an empty gas tank. He had a mile or two at best before the tank went dry. Begrudgingly, he called AAA, hoping they could help, and they informed him it would be around 2 hours and 45 minutes before they got there. Well, he thought, at least help is on the way. Now what am I going to do till then? He was off today, so he didn't need to call his boss. He had no immediate family to speak of, so he didn't have to call home. This train of thought suddenly made him sad, so he put on funny cat videos. getting bored of the cat videos and such pretty quickly. Pete decided he had time to catch up on a podcast from his favorite YouTube channel. He loves scary stories, horror movies, and sometimes a little dark comedy, so he put on Deimos in the Dark. He clicked on the most recent video. It was the Halloween special, An All Hallows Tale. Cool, he thought. It's just over an hour long. This would kill over a third of his time. There would also be enough short videos he hadn't seen yet to eat up over half of what was left. He rarely had time to finish an entire video in one sitting, let alone binge watch, so this was great, and it would be a great distraction from being stuck on the side of the road. It was beginning to get dark, but he hadn't really noticed. He had been immersed in the stories he had been listening to. His focus was interrupted rather abruptly by the sound of something tapping on the side of his vehicle. His eyes wide with surprise, he looked around in a frenzy to find the source of the tapping. It was gone, and he saw no one there. His imagination, he thought. He unpaused the video, only to be interrupted once more. This time by something slamming into the roof of his car. Now more terrified than before, he searched for the source of the impact, only to realize that it was now dark and he could see nothing outside, adding to the already growing anxiety. The trees were further off the road, but if it came from high enough, perhaps a branch could have broken off and reached his car. At least that's what he told himself, as he sat there, rationalizing the situation. What about how dark it was? He knew how many stories he'd listened to and how long they were. By his calculation, it'd still be daylight, with 20 minutes until the tow truck arrived. Looking at his watch, he saw roadside assistance was overdue. And then it had been longer than he thought. Maybe he zoned out or even nodded off, he thought. Knowing not much could be done about it, he called AAA once more. The driver arrived at the location, but there were no vehicles in sight, sir. Are you sure you gave the right location? You triangulated with my position with my GPS, my phone. The AAA service agent had run his location again and confirmed that it was where the driver claimed to have gone. He was informed that he would send another driver out as soon as possible, and they would text him with updates on the arrival time. This did little to ease Pete's infuriation. Now angry and frustrated, his fear was forgotten. He stepped out of his vehicle to inspect the roof after grabbing the flashlight from his glove box. The roof had a rather large dent and 3 scratch marks on it. Like claw marks, he thought. Maybe listening to scary stories while I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere wasn't such a good idea, he admonished himself. He quickly regretted speaking out loud as a low guttural growl came from behind him. He spun around, expecting to see his approaching doom. There wasn't anything there. Pete hurried back to his car and pulled his door open. Except he didn't. He couldn't because the door was locked. Shining his light through the window, he could see his keys dangling from the ignition. A string of obscenities would have surely followed this discovery, had it not been for the sound of branches breaking behind him. A singular curse did escape his mouth, this time as he launched himself into motion and began running down the road. He heard the pounding of footsteps behind him, clearly the sound of a quadruped. He was sure that the sound of the footsteps combined with the snarling sounds it was making, that it was a large predator. His heart was pounding in his chest and his breath began coming out in ragged gasps. He desperately sought a way out of this nightmare. Still unsure of how he got here in the first place, he felt the ground rumble beneath him and sink with the beast's footsteps, and was now sure that it was a very large predator. He was now in full panic mode. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for a way out. Without thinking, he changed directions, attempting to cross the road. Looking over his shoulder, the impossibility of what he saw was sure to catapult his mind into utter madness. His mind never got the chance. The whole area suddenly lit up. By the time Pete Winslow looked back down Triangle Road, it was too late. In his statement to the California Highway Patrol, the tow truck driver claimed that the man darted out in front of him from the darkness. He had been looking over his shoulder as if something were chasing him, but the driver saw nothing on the side of the road. AAA had been sent out earlier, but there was no sign of the vehicle, just as there was no vehicle now. Pete Winslow's car was found by the RCMP, still sitting in front of his home. His home was in Broadmoor, Richmond, BC, Canada. It was over 1,000 miles from where he had been struck down in Mariposa, California. Authorities never figured out how poor old Pete had gotten there or why. They also never figured out exactly what Pete Winslow had been running from that night. We have an idea, though, don't we? Maybe you and Pete have something in common. No? Maybe something else then. I have plenty of stories left, and more than enough time to tell them. Chapter 3. The Lights.
Perhaps Miss Ethel Young
It's alright, take a breath and start over.
Perhaps Miss Ethel Young's story will remind you of something. Ethel was out for a drive early one afternoon, enjoying the scenery of Hillsborough, New Jersey. Once she had reached Route 206, the name of the road would change to Falcon Road. She would be able to pull onto Hillsborough Promenade from there. This is where, on a normal Saturday, she would make her weekly trip to Weiss Market. For now, traveling. Where was I? For now, traveling down Triangle Road on such a lovely day, Ethel had not a care in the world. That was until she found herself driving through extremely tall pines. She immediately pulled over, trying to figure out where she could be. But she didn't recognize anything. This was ridiculous, she thought. She had grown up in Hillsborough. There's no way she could have gotten lost. Still, she knew she was lost just in the same. To make matters worse, her GPS had decided not to cooperate. It showed that she was on the Triangle Road, but not in New Jersey. It claimed that she was in California, a detour that would have taken days, not minutes. There was absolutely no way she could have gotten to the California in time she'd been driving. Of course, Ethel didn't know about Triangle Road or how it works. She decided to get out and take in her surroundings. Maybe she could get a better signal for her phone's navigation app. A little girl no older than 12 with long reddish blonde braids poked her head out from behind a tree. Her smile melted Ethel's heart, and the giggle she let out felt as if it was tickling Ethel. Now how can a sound tickle you? Ethel thought. The little girl would disappear from behind the tree, only to resurface, looking out from behind another one. It was like an elaborate game of peekaboo. This made Ethel laugh, for the first time in more years than she could remember. The 56-year-old Ethel Young felt alive. The 56-year-old Ethel felt young and alive. It was almost like this child's vibrance and vitality were rubbing off on her. Ethel suddenly felt the urge to run and play with the little girl. The little girl once more drew Ethel towards her. Every time she got close to the girl, she would duck behind a tree, and Ethel would see her poke her head out from behind a tree further in the distance. Before long, Ethel discovered she had wandered quite far into the forest. When she looked back, she saw no sign of the road, nor did she remember from which direction she had come. Well, that was stupid, Ethel, as her words echoed through the woods. She began to feel the severity of her situation. The little girl giggled somewhere in the distance, but this time Ethel almost felt dis-ease. Ethel slowly began returning to reality. What was the little girl doing out here in the woods? Where were her parents? It now occurred to her how things were not right. She tried retracing her steps, only to become confused and even further. Where was her phone? She thought about it and realized she left it in the car. Not that she thought she'd get a signal out here anyway, but still. She tried looking for the location of the sun in the sky, the light dense canopy above. She was hoping to get a sense of direction, but only discovered that light was waning. Great, now I'll be stuck out here in the dark. I have no phone, no jacket, and no idea where I am. These words did not comfort her, but only reinforced how alone she was. But she wasn't alone. The little girl was there. She seemed to know her way around. "Little girl?" Ethel called out. She shuddered and silently hoped the girl wouldn't answer. She remembered the recent feeling that something wasn't right about that girl. She heard a laugh, not the innocent giggle from before, but something much more sinister. Panic gripped Ethel as a sense of dread washed over her. Ethel wished now that she was alone, for what shared these woods with her was far worse. Her feeling that this was demonic, or at the very least evil, was wrong. The thing that had now stalked her could not be defined as good or evil, while its true intentions were worse. Her feelings, her it would harm her even if she didn't get away. Panic had not loosened its grip. Her mind was in a mad frenzy. She did what anyone whose common sense is overruled by fear would do. She ran. She would run in one direction, hear the laughter, and change direction. Then she would hear laughter ahead of her again, and exhaustion, and change her direction once more. This went on for 15 minutes, and she was well past exhaustion. Her lungs ached and her legs were shaky, but she kept running, eventually with it too dark to see where she was going. Ethel stopped and crouched behind a tree. Her ragged breath sounded so loud in her ears, she thought it may as well be coming out of loudspeakers. She was sure whatever it was would hear her, but she could run no further. At some point, she had twisted an ankle, which now throbbed excessively. The low-hanging branches had torn at her clothes and her skin as she ran. The many scratches on her face and arms now burned and stung. The darkness had now The darkness had enveloped her entire world to the point she could no longer see her hand in front of her face. She tried desperately to hear anything around her over the sound of her own breathing and a ringing in her ears. If panic had a grip on her before, it was now crushing her. After what seemed like hours, she started to feel as though she had been deafened by the silence. That was until she finally heard the sound. It began as a low humming noise, and steadily grew into a loud thrum, which vibrated the ground beneath her. All at once her world went white. To complete the darkness to absolute light, so white it was, as blinding had been more than she could comprehend. Her mind rejected the sudden change and began to shut down. The last thing she could recall before slipping into an eternal darkness was the familiar giggle of a little girl, and the outline against the complete white which the light had created. It was the outline of something humanoid, about the height of the little girl. Unlike the girl, this thing's arms and legs were too thin, looking like they would be somewhat frail. Its oversized head sat atop a scrawny neck mounted on a torso, which was way too short for the gangly arms that hung down from it. This final image may have been what finally broke Ethel's mind. Her car was found abandoned in California on the side of Triangle Road. When questioned, her neighbors swore that they had seen her drive off in it that afternoon, leaving her home in New Jersey. Likewise, people who knew her had seen her in New Jersey that day. No explanation was found, nor was any sign of Ethel Young, except for the times that I've given her a ride, of course. I always pick her up where they found her car and give her a ride to the bridge. She tells me that she needs to walk across it to get home, but I've never seen her make it to the other side. I hope one day she will.
Well,
Girl, you're gonna crush me with your big butt.
I hope you've enjoyed the first 3 chapters of Triangle Road. It's not my normal format for recording, and I'm not even sure if we have the tools here to edit. Like I said, we're making do with what we have. It's been a busy one, trying to get financing for what the insurance won't cover and get our house rebuilt. It is at this point a total loss, but we're fortunate enough to at least have homeowners insurance, so at least have a large part of it paid for. And other than that, we're going to do our best we can to get the recording stuff back together and replaced and start putting out regular stories again. Again, I hope you've enjoyed this, and welcome to the dark.